Here with reaction, House Speaker, former House Speaker and Fox News contributor Newt Gingrich is with us. Mr. Speaker, good to have you. Thank you. Let me start with Israel today. To me, the biggest threat is originally the fear of the Israelis is they'd be fighting a two-front war. In the north, Lebanon, Hezbollah, again funded by Iran. In the south, it's Gaza, Hamas, again, Iranian fingerprints all over that conflict. Now you have the added direct threat of an attack by Iran itself. What that would mean for the region, I can't predict, but it certainly would not be good and could lead, I think, to an all-out bigger conflict. Your thoughts?
Well, I hope that the reason President Biden sent 2 nuclear carrier battle groups, which is an enormous amount of combat power, into the eastern Mediterranean, is to make clear that if Hezbollah attacks Israel, that they will be annihilated. And I would hope that we're communicating the same thing to Iran. If this becomes, people need to remember, if this became an existential fight for the survival of Israel, Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel's not going to peacefully accept a second Holocaust. And so folks in Iran are playing with very dangerous circumstances in terms of what's going on. I would hope the United States will make very clear that if we had to, reluctantly, but we would, ensure that a northern front never developed and that Hezbollah was annihilated, which we have the capacity to do in those two nuclear carrier
But I have
groups.
a tough question for you.
The thing that worries me...
Is Joe Biden capable of hearing your very wise advice here? That to prevent a wider scale war, do you think he has the strength to do it? My sources in Israel have been telling me repeatedly that the Biden administration, and that would be Tony Blinken, and that would be Joe Biden, they're saying the right things publicly. Privately, they are urging Israel to show restraint. So if that's the case, I'm not sure that Joe Biden would be the guy to do that.
Look, that was the second thing I was going to get to. I mean, the first thing is they have sent 2 carrier battle groups. Biden has said clearly over and over, do not do this in terms of Hezbollah and Iran. Now, at some point, you'll get to a point where he either acts or he looks like a total, complete fool. And I think at that point, he will not have much choice. In terms of the meeting, I'm worried about the meeting today in Israel, because I think the Israelis have to be reassured that whatever steps are necessary to eliminate Hamas, the United States will support. Not this, do as much as you can while being reasonable. If Hamas is still around a year from now, Israel will have been defeated and the United States will have been defeated. So this is the moment to calmly and methodically eliminate Hamas as a system, to do whatever it takes to achieve that. And I am totally in favor of the Israelis being very calm, very methodical, very deliberate, but getting the job done. And I hope that Biden is not going to suggest to them that they do anything less than the complete destruction of Hamas.
Okay, let me ask you this, and I saw a newsletter that maybe I saw an early copy of it. I don't really know, but a lot of things are going on as it relates to Speaker. Jim Jordan got 200 votes today. I think he would have needed 216 if I'm correct. Now you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, tweeting out, if you don't want Jim Jordan to be Speaker, contact your representative. In other words, the 20 Republicans that didn't vote for him today. Sure. Jeffries is saying we have 2 objectives: stop Jim Jordan and get back to work. Then you have the Lincoln Project, and they don't want Jim Jordan as Speaker. Then you have Hakeem Jeffries, an election denier himself, using the MAGA Republican line. The one thing that I might find myself in a little bit of disagreement with you, which we don't often disagree. You seem to be open to the idea of a Band-Aid or a temporary fix, or the Speaker pro tem right now, McHenry from North Carolina, filling that role, being empowered for 60, 90 days. To me, that is not Republican leadership. I think they need to stay in a room and never come out until they pick a speaker. And, white smoke comes out of the chimney. That would be a good idea, in my view. And secondly, I think it's very, very important that they get this job done and show the country that they can make tough decisions, that they can unite with their small majority and win. I think you're disagreeing with me on that.
No, look, I think if Jim Jordan, if he has a chance tomorrow, if they vote tomorrow, if he can get the 217 votes, I am all for him. I think he's a smart guy. I think he's a very solid conservative. I think he's reached out and tried to become a very broad leader in a way that he would be, I think, a very strong Speaker of the House. The point I've made in my newsletter, which is coming out of Gingrich 360 tonight, is we're pretty straightforward. If Jordan can't win, and if Scalise can't win, then, first of all, the people you should really blame are the 8 Republicans who are Benedict Arnolds, who were traitors, who joined with the Democrats to cause total chaos with no idea what was going to come next. Those 8 people didn't have a clue what they were unleashing, and they had no plan for how to put it back together. And now they've legitimized, if they get to be idiots, everybody else gets to be an idiot. And suddenly you have a party looking at each other, yelling at each other, and being pretty angry about the state they're in. The only argument, I think, for McHenry is, if you cannot get an agreement tomorrow in Jordan, the world is moving, as we just talked about. Israel's in a big war. Ukraine is in a war. China's on offense. The
why not
border is
have,
open.
if need be,
Drugs
why
are
not have
pouring in.
15 votes? If need be, why not do what they did with McCarthy?
Well, if I thought that would work, I would be for 15 votes. I'd be for 15 votes, frankly, to bring McCarthy back. But the fact is, I have no faith that you can put this together right now. Now, again, if I'm all for Jordan having an opportunity tomorrow, I hope he can win. I'd much rather have a new speaker than have a speaker pro tem. But I wrote my newsletter on the grounds that my hunch is that 200 votes is about what he's going to get. 200 votes is much higher than Scalise got, and Scalise was the majority leader. And my sense from talking to people in the House tonight is that in the next vote, he might actually get fewer, not more votes. If that happens, we can't sit around and suck our thumbs and hope the world will wait until the House Republicans get their act together. Every day we're closer to the end of the continuing resolution. Every day we're closer to a huge aid package for Israel that has to be passed. Every day we are failing to do the investigations we need to be doing. And so if in a worst case, I think that we've had our 2 best shots, Scalise and Jordan. If Jordan can win, I am totally for him. This is not to undercut him. And Jim is a good guy. He's a very competitive guy. As you know, he's 156 to 1 in high school wrestling. He was twice the NCAA wrestling champion for the country. He's a very competitive, very smart guy. But I also understand numbers. And I quit because I had 19 guys who thought that balancing the budget, reforming welfare, cutting taxes wasn't enough. I wasn't conservative enough for them. So I understand how this game is played, and I'm just saying it's a numbers game, given the current narrow Republican majority, unless they can get in a room and get everybody to agree. And frankly, there are a lot of people who are relatively normal who are now so angry at the 8 guys who betrayed them that it's very hard for them to have a rational conversation. And my only point is, maybe you need a couple months of just getting business done, being calm, having an interim caretaker, and understanding that maybe by January you can have a rational decision.
I think they give, in my opinion, that'll come off a Band-Aid solution, a temporary solution, if in fact they get that done. To me, shows that they are weak, that they're not leaders, or if any Republicans work with Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats, they're showing Republicans and the American people they can't handle the power that has been entrusted to them, and that's a shame. I'll give you the last 5 seconds. Go ahead.
No, it isn't. No, you're right. This is a sign of weakness, not strength. It's a sign of immaturity. It's a sign of what happens when you have 8 traitors sitting in the middle of your group, and nobody's been able to figure out a solution. I'm just suggesting maybe time out and a few months to calm down is the only way forward. Not the best way, the only way.
We'll put the children in timeout. That's what it sounds like. Probably the appropriate term.
All right.
I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope they seize the moment and understand that the People's House needs to open. We'll see tomorrow. Thank you, sir. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.